Thank you, Haley. And I think you can go ahead and put up my presentation.
Okay.
And while Haley's doing that, I just want to thank everyone for volunteering with the City of Gladstone. The city has made great strides in improving services, and we are excited about the future. I'm Jackie Betts, City Administrator, and tonight, City Attorney Emily Matassar and I will provide you an orientation on what it means to be a volunteer with the city. We have a lot of information to get through tonight, so we ask that you please hold questions until the end. We are also recording this presentation so you can reference it later, or for those that could not attend tonight, they have access to it as well. The city has an ordinance that governs appointments and purposes of the boards, commissions, and committees. We have 7 committees, and tonight I will provide a quick introduction of each, and then Emily will go over the volunteers' authority, public meetings, public records, government ethics laws, and political activities. Before we begin, though, I wanted to share that it's important to use volunteers in local government to enhance the work of staff, accomplish work that would otherwise not be done, allow residents greater ownership in their community, and to build a better community. Volunteering provides valuable service opportunities. You can gain experience and learn new skills. There are social interactions. There's the opportunity to make a difference and a sense of accomplishment. The city recently developed a branding and tourism strategy, which you will see on the cover of this presentation. And as a small token of gratitude, staff is going to mail a small package of our new pins, a keychain, and a new journal for each of the volunteers. As you will learn tonight, there is a monetary amount in gifts that you can and cannot accept as a public official, but we're very grateful to have all of you with us tonight. So with that, Haley, you can go ahead and go to the first slide. So I also wanted to start with the City Council because they are volunteers too. They put in a lot of time and are committed to supporting staff and the community in accomplishing the City Council adopted goals. They are elected for 4 years at staggered terms. For more information on the terms, you can visit the city's website, but I wanted to formally introduce Mayor Tammy Stemple, our Council President Matt Tracy, Councillor Randy Ripley, Councillor Greg Alexander, Councillor Anessa Hartman, Councillor Tracy Todd, and Councillor Mindy Garlington. Next. So the first committee is our audit committee, and they typically meet at the end of the calendar year. I'm not going to read the purpose verbatim on each slide because you have that in front of you. But typically they will meet at the end of December. This year it happens to be the end of January that they're going to meet to review the city's previous fiscal year financials. They have a meeting coming up at the end of January, and they will select a chair at that time. The next slide, Haley. I wanted to introduce the audit committee members. They are Sierra Cook, Neil Reisner, Drusilla Weiland, Steve Johnson, Tanya Neff, and we have a counselor liaison who is Councillor Mindy Garlington. And the staff for this committee is our finance consultant, Kathy Brucker, and myself. Next is the budget committee. And the city of Gladstone moved to a biennium budget process a couple of years ago. And so what that means is that the budget committee only has to meet every 2 years. It's referenced as a biennium budget. The current budget is for July 2021 through June 2023. We do expect the budget committee will reconvene in the first part of 2023 to then discuss the next couple of years of the city's budget process. Next. To introduce you to our budget committee members, we have Sierra Cook, Pat Smith, Michael Milch, who was the chair for the last biennium budget, Neil Reisner, and the full city council. They are part of the budget committee, and we are required to have the same number of citizens as elected officials. So as you can see, we do have 3 vacancies that we should fill before we start the next biennium budget process. Again, the staff person for this is our finance consultant, Kathy Brucker, and myself. Next, we have the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. They meet virtually because of Zoom and the pandemic right now each month, and it's the second Monday of the month. When we go back to in-person meetings, our committees and boards generally hold their meetings in the city council chambers, but because of the pandemic, they are doing theirs virtually. And next, I'd like to introduce the members of the Park and Recreation Board: Olivia Edwards, Ellen Faber, David Michael, Bruce Hildreth, Nancy Turner, Stephanie Phipps, and John Eichstad is the chair currently. And Mayor Tammy Stemple is the liaison, and the staff assigned to this group is Darren Canaparoli, our new Public Works Director. Very active group in Gladstone, helping address our parks. Next, the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission also is a very active group this last year, and it's going to get busier this year because we're doing a zoning code change regarding our housing legislation. Currently, they meet each month on the 3rd Tuesday. And next, I will introduce the members of the Planning Commission: Andrew Labani, Tom Mercero, Andrea Langston, Jennifer Vilbeda, who just had her first meeting yesterday, Les Poole, Michael Milch, and Natalie Smith was voted to be the chair of the Planning Commission for 2022. Mayor Tammy Stemple is the liaison for the Planning Commission, and the staff person is Joy Fields, who is a senior planner with Clackamas County. We contract for planning services currently with the county. Next, the Senior Center Advisory Board is the only board that meets off-site when we're meeting in person. In other words, they don't meet in the city council chambers. They choose to meet at the Senior Center, which we think is very appropriate to do so. We have a new community services manager in the last few months that we've hired. They're currently meeting quarterly on the 3rd Tuesday. And I'd like to introduce the members of the Senior Center Advisory Board: Simona Gergesan, Evelyn Johannesson, Sylvia Kelmer, Josie Whitaker, Roxanne McMullen. Nancy Turner is the chair, and our newly appointed member is Mindy Prosky. The city councilor, who is the liaison for this committee, is Councilor Mindy Garlington. And as I mentioned, our community services manager, Tiffany Kirkpatrick, will be staffing this group. Next, we move on to the Traffic Safety Advisory Board. And as you can see, they handle anything related to pedestrian safety, to making recommendations to the city council on our roads and streets. They meet every other month, the 4th Monday of the month. And I will introduce you to this group. We have Jeffrey Johnson, Nathan Page, Ernest Mike Wiley, Yvonne McNeil, Andrew Labani is the chair. We have Mindy Prosky and Scott Lemon, who both were just newly appointed. And the city councilor liaison is Councilor Randy Ripley. And your staff person is the police chief, John Schmerber, for this group. So that takes us to the end of my presentation. You're going to hear a lot tonight about ethics. Cybersecurity training is something that when Tammy Bannock sent an email to all of our volunteers, you're required to do an online video. And that's simply because you are going to have a city email address that the city will be sending out information to you. And with that comes some regulations on how you can access your account and certain links. Cybersecurity is an issue nationwide, and computer systems are getting hacked. So it's really important that you watch the volunteer training on cybersecurity to protect the city's assets and its infrastructure. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Emily.
Great, thank you, Jackie. I'm going to try and share my screen here. So I'm getting a, okay, let me see, here we go. Okay. I'm going to start my slideshow, hopefully. Okay, can everybody see my, yes, okay. So my name is Emily Matassar. I am a city attorney for the city of Gladstone through BEH. I'm going to introduce myself just a little bit. I've been at BEH for almost 2 years, and before that, I was at the governor's office. I was in the general counsel office in the governor's office, where I worked on a lot of issues that we're going to talk about here today, mostly government accountability issues. So I've been working in this area for about 7 years now. So that's my background. So for tonight, I'm going to talk for a while, but I'm not going to make you an expert in these areas because you don't need to be an expert. What I'm going to try and do is introduce you to these issues and these laws so that you have the tools to recognize issues as they arise when you're doing your work for the boards and commissions for the city. Then, once you spot an issue from hopefully this presentation and other information that you gain, you'll know to ask for assistance as the issue arises. I don't want you to know the answers. I don't expect you to know the answer. We just need you to recognize an issue as it arises and then ask for additional guidance. So here are the topics that I'm going to discuss tonight. We're going to discuss the general authority, public meetings, public records, government ethics laws, and political activities, as Jackie mentioned. Oops, let's see. Okay, and I just want to say thank you to the city for having us and for all of you for showing up on this like dark and stormy night. Really appreciate it. And hopefully I will not take too long and present things clearly, and we'll all come away from this the better. So first we're going to talk about your authority. Now, by that I mean that as a member of a board or commission, you are a member of a board or commission. You can only act as a body. So what that means is that, generally speaking, neither the charter nor the municipal code grants power to you as an individual member of the board, commission, or council that you're on to act on behalf of the city. Rather, it's the body that you serve on that acts. So members are expected to abide by the decisions of their body, whether or not the individual member voted on the prevailing side. So even if you voted against a decision, if it passes and you're representing the body, then you are expected to abide by that decision. Likewise, if you as an individual member are authorized to represent the city before the public or another government agency, then you must support and advocate for the official city position, regardless of which side you voted on. Personal opinions and comments should be expressed only if you make clear that you're acting in an individual capacity and not representing the city's position. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the public meetings law. Generally speaking, well, let me give just a tiny bit of background to the public meetings laws. I believe that both the public meetings and the public records law were passed in the early 70s. And I think a lot of the government ethics laws that we're going to talk about tonight also were passed in the early 70s by the state legislature as sort of a government accountability trend that swept the nation back then, I think in response to some of the happenings in DC. So those laws, okay. The statute states that elected and appointed officials must meet in public to make or deliberate towards decisions. And like I said, that purpose is to encourage transparency in government accountability so that the public can know what its government is doing. Who is subject to the law? A governing body of a public body. And that means the city council, the board, a county board of commissioners, a school board, and then within a city, the planning commission, park board, subcommittees. If you're here, you likely sit on a board or commission, and your board or commission is subject to the public records law. In addition, citizen groups form to advise a public body. I think that's maybe what we're talking about here. So the legal requirements of the public meetings law, the first one we're going to talk about is notice. So the notice of time and place of the meeting must be reasonably calculated to inform interested persons of the meeting. And that usually means at least 24 hours in advance. Now, typically the board or commission has a regular meeting that is scheduled and has a system to notice that regular scheduled meeting. What you really have to sort of be aware is for special meetings. And then for a special meeting, if your committee has a special meeting, then you have to, make special notice of that meeting. And that's what this is about. But to be clear, all meetings must be noticed. So if someone specifically requests personal notice, then the committee must give personal notice to that person. The notice should include the principal subjects to be discussed, and it should be specific enough to allow a person to determine whether they feel it's necessary for them to attend. Having said that, as you can see here, a public body is not precluded from considering additional items during the meeting. So just because you didn't include a subject on the notice does not mean you cannot discuss it. Usually there's Robert's Rules of Order and you can add an agenda item and then discuss things not in the notice. So the law also has location requirements. So the location of the meeting must generally be within the jurisdictional boundaries of the city, unless you're attending a training where there will be no deliberations or meeting with another governing body, and it can be within that governing body's jurisdictional boundaries. Now, the law allows a governing body to conduct meetings by phone or other electronic communication. And in fact, I didn't get a chance to update this slide, but during COVID, I believe that there was an executive order that made a temporary rule that required public bodies to hold meetings by telephone or other electronic communication. And the legislature in the 2021 legislative session made that law permanent, and it went into effect on January 1st. So what that means is that even when we go back to normal times and meeting in person, a governing body of a public body still must provide for a telephone or electronic option for the public to view, and if there's participation allowed at the meeting, then to also allow the public to participate electronically. So additional location considerations, the location must be of a sufficient size relative to the expected interest in the meeting. And that can be just an estimate. If there's something that, if there's a meeting for which there's no building large enough to house all of the interested people in the area, then there can be overflow rooms and etc. It does not need to be held in a government building, but it may not be held in a place where discrimination is practiced. And then also it must be accessible to persons with disabilities. Okay, so the actual content of the meeting. Votes must be tallied and attributed to each member of the governing body. You may use paper ballots, but they cannot be secret. That all votes must be public. For minutes, the law requires the governing body to take and keep minutes. Those minutes need not be verbatim, but they must contain a roll call, including in executive sessions, which we're going to discuss in more detail later. The minutes also must include motions, resolutions, actions, sort of everything that the body does during the meeting, the result of the votes, and also the substance of all discussions. This says, under some circumstances, an audio or video record of the meeting will be sufficient instead of minutes. And that basically just means that if all of those necessary items can be captured by an audio or video record, then that suffices. And minutes don't need to be kept. So in addition, even though executive sessions, which like I said, we're going to discuss more later, are closed to the public, records of the executive session discussions still must be kept. So we recommend keeping minutes of the executive session just as you would the regular meeting. So control of public meetings. Generally speaking, the state law provides the public a right to attend and observe the public meetings, but not a right to participate in public meetings. Sometimes the state law does provide the public a right to participate in certain meetings, mostly public hearings, and also municipal ordinances or the bylaws of a particular board or commission could permit public participation, like a public comment period. So during a meeting, the governing body, usually the presiding officer, generally can establish time limits for public comment, but those standards need to be applied equally to all. And what that means is if, let's say you have a lot of citizens that show up to your meeting that want to make public comment, and there's a group that wants to speak in support of whatever action you're considering, and then there's a group that wants to speak in opposition. And let's say that there's a lot more people in support and a lot fewer people in opposition. Well, each person, if the presiding officer sets a time limit of 3 minutes, each person gets 3 minutes to speak, and that rule must be enforced equally to all persons who speak, even if there's a lot more people who show up in support or in opposition, it must be applied equally to all. So now we're talking more about even stricter control of a public meeting. A public body may not remove a member of the public from a meeting unless it can clearly demonstrate that the individual is disrupting the meeting in a manner that precludes the board or commission from conducting its business. So that should be pretty straightforward. Obviously, someone, displaying threats or acting violently, but even just protesting in a disruptive manner or somehow just disrupting the meeting such that you cannot conduct your business, that would be, then it would be permissible to remove the person. Okay, now we're going to get into the weeds a little bit here, but stay with me. So the law addresses public meetings in 2 ways: meetings and meet. The meetings is pretty straightforward. So all meetings of a public body must be in public. The statute states all meetings of the governing body of a public body shall be open to the public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting except executive sessions. But as I said, the law also describes meet. So a quorum may not meet in private. A quorum of a governing body, the statute says, may not meet in private for the purpose of deciding on or deliberating towards a decision on any matter except for executive session. Okay, so let's talk about meeting. A meeting means, this one, like I said, is more straightforward, means the convening of a governing body of a public body for which a quorum is required in order to make a decision or deliberate towards a decision on any matter. We'll talk about what those things mean also. A meeting does not include an on-site inspection of a meeting, of a project or a program. It also does not include the attendance of the members of a governing body at a national, regional, or state association to which the public body or the members belong to. And that means, for example, conferences, trainings, things like that. So like I said, we're going to talk about a quorum. What is a quorum? There's always some minimum number of members that must participate in order for a body to transact business, and that's the quorum of the body. Now, state law does not define quorum, but defers to local law. And in Gladstone, this code provision defines it as a majority of the voting members shall constitute a quorum for the conduct of business, and concurrence of a majority of those members present shall be required to decide any matter. Now, Gladstone's code also provides that unless otherwise specified, all boards, commissions, and committees will consist of 7 members. So unless your board, commission, or committee has a different number than 7 members, the quorum usually is 4 voting members. Okay, so a gathering of less than a quorum of a governing body is not a meeting, except that subcommittees of a body constitute a governing body in and of itself. And as such, a quorum would be a majority of the subcommittee. I think that's pretty straightforward. But as Jackie mentioned, we will take questions at the end. So just now, this is where it gets a little confusing, because remember, a quorum may not meet in private for the purpose of deciding on or deliberating towards a decision on any matter. So that's where meet comes in instead of just meeting. So when does a public body meet? There's some details about this case on the screen, which we're not going to get too in the weeds on. But this case, in this case, the Oregon Supreme Court explained that it is possible for a quorum of a governing body to meet in violation of the law, even if there is no meeting. And I'm just going to read this, but I think it's more explained in the next slide. So the court determined that persons comprising a governing body can meet even when not convening a meeting. In other words, you can violate the public meeting laws, even if a quorum never gathers contemporaneously. So even if you're not all meeting in one place at once, without doing the notice and location and all the public requirements, you can still violate the law. So what this refers to is called serial meetings. A serial meeting occurs when a series of communications of any kind, directly or through intermediaries, to discuss, deliberate, or take action takes place between a quorum of a governing body. So that's true even if at no given time does a quorum of the governing body communicate contemporaneously about the topic in question. So I think let's go to the next slide, and I might, oh no, okay. So what this means is that, for example, if you talk to one of your other board members about to discuss the business of the board, and you're only talking to one, it can still constitute a serial meeting and violate the public records or public meetings law if you do that in private. You should be very cautious about discussing in private the business of the board or commission with your members, even if you're not all meeting contemporaneously in one place. Okay, what about social gatherings? Can a quorum of a governing body meet in social settings? Yes, cautiously. So the gathering must be purely social. And the members should avoid any discussion of official business. And knowing that at some point, if you do discuss official business, then that social gathering could turn into a meeting. So basically, you should be very careful about discussing official business outside of public meetings with your board members, your fellow members. And also remember that attendance at conferences and trainings and et cetera are excluded from the definition of a meeting. So best practices. We have some listed here. You should refrain from using the reply all function on emails. And that's because any communication can violate the public meetings laws, including emails. Board commission members should refrain from serial communications via email, telephone, face-to-face, or even social media postings. Again, because that is the meat portion of the statute. Likewise, you should avoid using staff or other individuals as intermediaries, and that includes members of the community. So the way this would come up is if you are talking to a community member about an issue relevant to your board, and you say, I'll consider this issue, I'll consider voting this way on this issue if the other member does X, Y, and Z. And then if that community member goes and speaks to that other board member, then there's a contact, and then you risk the serial communications violation there because you're directing an individual to act as an intermediary. So you should be cautious about that. Okay, I promised we would talk about executive sessions, and here we are. So public bodies may meet in executive sessions only in specified situations. And an executive session is defined as any meeting or part of a meeting of a governing body that is closed to certain persons for deliberation on certain matters. And certain persons means generally closed to the public. So a public body may hold an open session even when the law permits it to hold an executive session. So even if one of these subjects applies and the public body may hold an executive session, you don't need to. So a public body is authorized to hold closed sessions on the following subjects: real property transactions, exempt public records, pending or threatened litigation, employees, and labor negotiations. And those are listed in the statute. It's ORS 192.660. So no executive session may be held for the purpose of taking any final action or making any final decision. And the purpose of that is to allow the public to know the results of the discussion. It goes back to the whole purpose of the public meetings law. But having said that, taking a formal vote in an open session satisfies that requirement, even if the public vote merely confirms a consensus reached in executive session. So if you have a proper subject of executive session, and you enter into the executive session and you discuss it, then you close the executive session, open the public session, and then take the vote in the public session. So if you do meet an executive session, and there's follow-up that needs to happen, then members should provide direction or consensus to staff. And then contact with other parties is left to the designated staff or representatives handling the issue. And then this one is important. No member of a board or commission should make public the discussions or information obtained in executive session unless required by law. I think we're going to talk a little bit about confidentiality later, but it's especially true in an executive session because the legislature has essentially deemed those topics to be particularly sensitive, and so confidentiality is even more important. So in order to enter into an executive session, you must follow specific procedures. Those are that the person presiding, usually the presiding officer, must announce the statutory authority for the executive session before going into closed session. And you also must announce if you plan to return to open session to take action. I should have mentioned this earlier, the Attorney General publishes a public records and meetings manual, and it has a lot of very helpful information about those two topics. And one of the very helpful pieces in that manual is a script, a sample script for entering into an executive session, which you can just read and select the statutory basis for entering the session, the particular topic, and then you'll know that you followed the law and you can enter into executive session. So at that point, you can close the session and require all members of the public to leave. And then, however, media is permitted to attend in most situations, but they may not report on the discussions, the conversation during the executive session. However, the media can use that information to follow up and pursue other leads. That's just sort of something to be aware of. So after each topic, I'm going to have a brief takeaway for that topic. And so the public meeting takeaway is you should not make or deliberate towards making a decision with a quorum of your board or commission outside of a properly noticed public meeting. Okay, so now we're going to talk about public records. The public records law sort of has two basic principles, and those are inspection and retention or preservation. So the definition of a public record is any writing containing information relating to the conduct of the public's business. And writing is defined expansively. And it means, I'm not going to read everything here. It means handwriting, typewriting, printing, but it also means photography. It means pictures. It means maps. It means graphs and charts, and is very expansive. So don't confuse yourself that just because something is not, written text, that means it's not a writing. It is. So any person may request copies of or the ability to inspect a record, a public record, and the public body may charge reasonable fees for inspection. Also, there are many, I lost count, but there used to be a couple years ago, there was over 450 exemptions. I would bet that there are more now. So like 500 or more exemptions that may apply to certain information and permit the city to keep that information confidential, even in the event of a public records request. So for retention, the Secretary of State Archives Division sets record retention policies, and the city must follow the policy that's approved by the Archives Division. And that generally requires the public body to keep one official copy of each record for the applicable retention period. So what that means is, a lot of times, for example, you'll go into a meeting and you'll receive an agenda. Well, every single member does not need to keep the agenda. Probably the person who created the agenda is the proper person to keep the agenda, and that's within the law. You must keep one official copy of each record. Photocopies don't count. Now, destruction or altering a public record in a manner inconsistent with the record retention policy is a crime. It's a misdemeanor, and it's the knowing destruction or altering, I can't remember the whole list of a public record. So try to avoid doing that. Now, this public record duty extends obviously to staff, but also to elected and appointed officials. And that means social media posts and emails to home computers. So the takeaway for you is that it's not the medium, it's the content that's important. So if you have a writing that relates to the conduct of the public's business and it's on your home computer or sent from your personal email address, it's still a public record. It doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't matter, what form it takes. If it relates to the conduct of the public's business and it's a writing, then it's a public record and you have a duty to retain it. And the city will, if requested, the city will, allow a person to inspect it. So, having said all that, even after individual email messages are deleted from your computer, the messages may continue to exist on the computer backup tapes for a period of time, and those remain public records. And with any public record, a public body must make all the non-exempt records, in this case email, available for inspection and copying regardless of its storage location. So I'm going to tell you one more sort of caution, which is even if, let's say, a record retention schedule is 3 years, and let's say the record was not destroyed at the end of that pursuant to the record's retention schedule, it just wasn't destroyed, even though it could have been. If that is requested, you may not destroy it pursuant to even if you were due to destroy it a year ago, you can't destroy it once the request is made. So you should be really cautious about destroying public records. And if you have any questions about this or anything else, feel free to ask staff, get in touch with me. I'll have my email address on at the end. Okay, so the public records takeaway is make sure that at least one copy of any record that you use related to your official capacity is kept in accordance with the city's record retention policy. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the government ethics laws. So the policy of these laws is that service as a public official is a public trust, and as one safeguard for that trust, the people require all public officials to comply with the law. The law has various parts. A lot of those we'll talk about tonight. So abuse of office, reporting requirements, conflict of interest, nepotism, gifts, use of confidential information, and then the Ethics Commission and penalties, which we're not going to discuss. But the Ethics Commission is very helpful. And if you have questions about anything, you can feel free to reach out to them, and they have a really helpful website as well. Okay, so first we're going to talk about abuse of office or inappropriate use of office. So That law states that public officials may not use or attempt to use their position to obtain a financial gain or avoid a financial detriment that would not otherwise be available but for the holding of the official position. It applies to the public official as well as relatives and members of the household of the public official, plus businesses with which the official is associated. So what that means is that the financial gain or avoidance of a financial detriment to those people and businesses with which you're associated is what would bring in this law. Okay, so there are a variety of actions that a public official may take or participate in that would constitute the prohibited use or attempted use of the position. It could be voting in a public meeting, placing a signature on a government agency's document, making a recommendation, making a purchase with government agency funds, conducting personal business on a government agency's time or with a government agency's resources. And what that means, let's see, maybe I'll give you an example here. Let's say a relative of yours is up for a contract that you're considering. It would be an abuse of office to use your position to award that contract to your relative, because that would be obtaining a financial gain for your relative that would not otherwise be available but for your holding of your position, right? Okay, so did I skip one? I don't think so. Okay, so what is a business with which a person is associated under the statute? It means a private business if these things are met. If the person, meaning the public official, you, are a director, officer, owner, or employee or agent of the business, or if you own or have owned more than $1,000 of stock, equity interest, stock options, or debt interests in the private business in the preceding calendar year. Likewise, for a publicly held corporation, a business with which a person is associated would be a publicly held corporation if you're an officer or director of the publicly traded company, or if you own or have owned more than $100,000 worth of stock in the preceding calendar year. A business with which a person is associated also includes a business that is a source of income for the person that produces 10% or more of your total annual household income, and you're required to file an annual statement of economic interest. Now, a statement of economic interest only applies, it doesn't apply to very many city officials. So I'm not going to talk in detail about it now, but it's a statement that requires you to report to the Ethics Commission businesses, real property, gifts, sources of income. But it only applies to the city council and then certain commissions like the Planning and Zoning Commission and Development Commissions. So if you're a member of one of those, then either someone with the city will be in touch about the statement of economic interest, or reach out to me or someone with the city and we can figure it out if you have to file an annual statement of economic interest. Okay, so for the purposes of abuse of office, relatives include the spouse, parent, step-parent, child, sibling, step-sibling, son-in-law, or daughter-in-law of the public official. That's you. It also includes the parent, step-parent, child, sibling, step-sibling, son-in-law, or daughter-in-law of the spouse of the public official. So your spouse's parent, step-parent, etc. It also includes any individual for whom the public official has a legal support obligation. So if you have a legal support obligation to anyone that's not listed up above, that's still considered a relative. And then likewise, any individual from whom the candidate receives benefits arising from that individual's employment. So if your employment benefits someone else that's not an individual for whom you have a legal support obligation and not listed above, then that person is considered a relative. And members of the household include any person who resides with a public official, even if it's not one of those people listed as a relative. Okay, so we're going to talk about conflicts of interest. So a conflict of interest arises when a decision or recommendation you are making would or could result in a private pecuniary benefit or detriment to you, your relatives, or a business with which either you or your relatives are associated. A conflict of interest comes in two forms: actual and potential conflicts. I'm not used to talking so much in one go, so my throat's pretty dry. Hang on. Okay, sorry. So what is the difference between an actual and a potential conflict? An actual conflict arises when any decision or act by you would result in a private pecuniary benefit or detriment to you, your relatives, or associated business, while a potential conflict arises when a decision or action by you could result in such an outcome. And this is an important distinction because the requirements for each are different. So what do you do if you have a conflict? For actual conflicts, you must publicly announce the conflict, and you must refrain from participation in any official action on the issue, including any discussion of the matter. So what that means is you can't announce a conflict and then give your opinion, discuss the topic with your board, but just abstain from the vote. For an actual conflict, you must publicly announce the conflict and refrain from any participation in any official action on the issue. For potential conflicts, you must publicly announce the potential conflict every time the issue arises. And then after the disclosure, you may participate in the official action on the issue, including discussions and votes. Let's go back to the potential conflict definition here. So a potential conflict, it's the last clause of this whole slide. A potential conflict arises when a decision or act by you could result in a private pecuniary benefit or detriment to you, your relatives, or an associated business. So are there exceptions? Well, first, I just want to also point out, sorry, going back, this statute does not include members of household. So the private pecuniary benefit or detriment to you, your relatives, or business with which you're associated does not include member of household. But also nonprofits. So if you sit on a board of a nonprofit and you sit on a board here, the definition of business does not include that nonprofit where the associated public official receives no financial benefit. There's also a class exception. And what that means very broadly is if a decision you make benefits an entire class of persons equally, and the persons are all similarly situated, and you have a relative within that class, then it wouldn't be a conflict of interest. But you should seek legal advice prior to relying on this exception, because it's basically the Ethics Commission takes the position that only the Ethics Commission can determine if it applies. So you should be really cautious. Okay, next subject in the ethics laws is gifts. So the law prohibits public officials, relatives of public officials, and members of a public official's household from soliciting or receiving any gifts over $50 in a calendar year from any source that has or could reasonably be expected to have legislative or administrative interest in the public official's decisions or votes. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that means, but the important thing is to look to the source of the gift. And that's for two reasons. first, the limit is any gifts over $50 from any source. So even if the person gives multiple gifts of less than $50, if they total over $50 in a calendar year, then it's a violation. And you must also look to the source of the gift, because that, if the person has a legislative or administrative interest in your decision or votes, then it's a violation. If they don't, then it doesn't. It's not a violation. So what is a gift? It's anything of economic value, but the definition excludes things such as, and this is such a funny slide because if you look up the statute of gifts, there are more exceptions than you can even imagine. The exceptions take up like 90% of the law. So things that are excluded: gifts from relatives or members of your household, gifts in the form of tokens, plaques, trophies, mementos with a resale value of less than $25, and gifts received as part of your private business, employment, or volunteerism. Several other exemptions, many, many, many other exemptions. Okay, so I think that one thing missing from this gifts is what to do if you receive a gift. I would say that if you receive a gift, regardless of its value, from someone who has a legislative or administrative interest in your work on the board or commission, then you should ask for assistance with what to do with it, either from city staff, or you can reach out to me and we'll figure out whether you can accept that gift. Okay, confidential information. This is, I referenced this earlier. So members of boards and commissions must keep all written materials provided to them on matters of confidentiality under law in complete confidence to ensure that the city's position is not compromised. And that means no mention of the information read or heard should be made to anyone other than fellow board members, city staff participating in the matter, or the city attorney's office. If there is a confidential matter, then all public statements, information, or press releases relating to it will be handled by designated staff. And furthermore, state law specifically prohibits public officials from attempting to use confidential information gained because of your position or by carrying out your assigned duties to further your personal gain. That would be a violation of the ethics laws. And the ethics laws are personal to you. So if you violate the ethics laws, then you are, I don't want to say on your own, but it's personal to you. It wouldn't be the city that has a problem. It would be you as the public official that has the problem for violating the ethics laws. Okay, so the takeaway for the government ethics portion is to be on the lookout for any actions that you may take related to the city, whether in a personal or official capacity, that may affect the financial interests of you, your relatives, businesses with which you or your relatives are associated, or members of your household. Okay, our last topic is political activity. So ORS 260.432, and I think it's colloquially referred to as the Little Hatch Act, sort of after the federal Hatch Act regarding political activity. So the statute states that a person, including public employers and elected officials, may not actually coerce, command, or require, or attempt to coerce, command, or require a public employee to promote or oppose any political committee or any initiative, referendum, or recall, petition, ballot measure, or candidate. And that's where it is the political activity. Political committee or initiative, referendum, recall, petition, ballot measure, candidate, that's all political activity. So ORS 260.4322 states that public employees, including school administrators, city managers, police chief, administrative staff, etc., may not be involved in promoting or opposing any political activity while on the job during working hours. So note the difference here. Public employee versus elected official and public employers. We're going to talk more about that here. Because under Oregon law regarding political activity for public officials, elected officials, if you're elected to office by voters, such as the city council, and appointed officials, which is all other board and commission members, are treated differently. So essentially, the breakdown is that elected officials have a lot more leeway. Okay, so elected officials may advocate a political position at any time, including endorsing candidates for public office. Elected officials may perform campaign activity at any time, but must exercise caution not to involve any public employees' work time. And also, most employers have rules about use of public or use of your computer and the Xerox machine and such. And so you should follow your or an elected official must follow its own policies on that. So an elected official may vote as part of a city council to support or oppose a measure. But if the council is considering supporting or opposing a measure, it still must not use public employee staff time to assist with those activities, except for purely ministerial functions, such as the city recorder, preparing minutes or reflecting the vote taken at the meeting to support or oppose the measure. The city recorder can do that. It's a ministerial function. An elected official may also use their own designated public office space and equipment. Oh, here's what I was talking about before in advocacy activities, but only consistent with the city's otherwise applicable policies concerning the use of public property and equipment. That's what I mentioned earlier. Okay, elected officials, even though they have more leeway, they still may not request a public employee, either on or off duty, perform any political activity. They also may not have an opinion piece or letter advocating a political position published in a public entity's newsletter or other publication produced or distributed by public employees. So as you can see, both of these relate to public employees. So elected officials, even though they have more leeway on political activity, they can't affect, coerce, remember that language, public employees to do that. Okay, so appointed officials. So what can appointed officials do and not do? Appointed officials means, appointed by the city, appointed by a city official to the board or commission. So appointed officials may not promote or oppose political activity, election petitions, candidates, or measures while acting in their official capacity. And what does that mean? Appointed officials are acting in their official capacity when they're at the meetings of the board or commission, working on any duty that's assigned by the board or commission, working on an official publication for the board or commission, or appearing at an event in your official capacity. And that means an event, not a meeting of the board or commission. So whenever you're acting in your official capacity, you cannot promote or oppose a political activity. What can you do as an appointed official? You can use personal time to participate in volunteer political activity. You may want to keep a record of your time. You can also use your titles to engage in political activity as long as you are not acting in an official capacity. And we recommend that you make it very clear that your title is being used for identification purposes only. So for example, make a clear statement. If, like, let's say you have a name tag, title used for identification only, something like that. Okay, when do the political activities laws kick in? For initiative, referendum, and recall petition efforts, as soon as the prospective petition is filed with the appropriate elections filing officer. For ballot measures referred to the ballot by the city, the political activities laws kick in as soon as the measure is certified to the ballot. For candidate issues, the laws kick in as soon as the person becomes a candidate under the definition of ORS 260.005(1)A, and for actions related to a political committee whenever the political committee is active. Now, the caution I like to make here is that some of these are outside of the person's control. So for example, you might not know when a measure is certified to the ballot and when the political activities laws kick in. So I recommend that you take extra care in avoiding the political activities when the last thing within your control, the last action within your control. So submitting the measure for certification to the ballot. When it's submitted, you don't know when it's going to be certified, but take extra caution to avoid political activity once it's submitted, if that makes sense. Okay, so the takeaway for political activity is, except in limited situations that apply only to elected officials, do not engage in political activity in an official capacity, and do not ask or require city staff to do so at all. So that is the end of my prepared presentation. I guess I will leave that on there for now, in case you want to take down my email address, and you can feel free to follow up. And I think, Jackie, I don't know how you want to take questions, or if you want to.
Well, thank you, Emily. You know, sometimes I wonder if people would apply to volunteer if they've had this presentation first. But we really aren't presenting this to scare anybody, because a lot of what we went through tonight very rarely happens. And so that's why we said we were going to be throwing a lot of information at you tonight. But what we also want to make clear is that when you're in doubt, ask staff, because staff is here to help you as a volunteer. And as long as you're reading the material that we're sending you before you attend a meeting and be prepared, you're going to do great. But with that, I'm sure that there are some thoughts or comments through that presentation. And so, Haley, if anybody is raising their hand, I would just ask that they state their name and the question, and we will see if we can get some answers.
We don't have anybody raising their hand right now.
Well, that's either a good thing, or like I said, people are wondering what they got themselves signed up for. Well, I would like to thank Emily for all of the information that you provided. And again, I want to thank all of you for volunteering in Gladstone. You are embarking on a very great time for getting a lot of our projects done to enhance the community. I ask that you please check your city email and look at the cybersecurity training video. And if you have any questions, staff is here to help you, and we wish you the best of luck. And then, so with that, Emily, unless you have anything else, that will conclude our training for tonight.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And I fully agree with what Jackie said. I hope I didn't scare you too much. And I really value and appreciate volunteers' work for the city. And, you know, hopefully you'll never have to hear from me again and everything will go swimmingly. So thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.